In this video, I'm going to share a simple technique that you can use to edit your photos creatively, even when you don't know the direction you want to take your edit. In this comprehensive Luminar Neo editing tutorial, we'll start with this photo and then we'll craft this more creative edit using my easy two-step system. So you've opened your photo editor, you've got a photo in front of you, you're staring at it, you know that it needs improving, but you just don't know what to do or where to start. Well, if that's happened to you, this video will help you. When it comes to photo editing, I'm a big fan of having an idea in your mind before you even start of the direction you want to take with your photo edit. However, that's not always possible. Sometimes we know that our photo needs improving, but we're just not sure what to do. I have a photo I took when I was at the iconic Milford Sound in New Zealand, but unfortunately when I was there, the lighting just didn't really do anything special, and I felt pretty let down by what I was able to actually capture on my camera's sensor. So I know that I need to improve this photo, but currently I'm not really sure what creative direction I want to go with it. So join me in Luminar Neo, where I'll share this approach that hopefully you can adopt to save yourself when you get in this same situation. As you can see, this is an amazing location. However, the photo itself doesn't really do justice to what I was hoping to capture. This is actually a stitched panoramic photo from one-off exposures. However, I actually have access to differing exposures. So I shot one base exposure, then I shot one darker and one brighter. So rather than just merging the base exposures, which I'd done previously, which gave us quite a flat photo, I'm going to try grabbing all of these and dragging them into the panorama stitching tool. I'm going to open up the settings and just check that I'm happy with things like auto alignment, ghost reduction. I'll turn that on but leave it on low. Not too much was moving in this scene. I'll also remove any chromatic aberration. I'm not worrying about de-vignetting. And because we're dealing with a landscape, not architecture, I'm not too worried about any minimal distortion that may be present in my lens. So I'm just going to go with those settings, click start, and this time I have the ability to create an HDR, high dynamic range panorama. So I'm just going to click continue and let Luminar calculate and do its thing. So while Luminar crunches the numbers and smushes those photos into one pano, just want to say to you guys, I'm not going to tell you straight away what this technique, I want you to actually look for what I'm doing. It may be obvious to you, it may not, but I will clarify. But to start with, I just want you to watch and actually see whether you can pick up the technique that I'm actually doing. Okay, so unlike in the last version, you can see that now we have a load of lovely rich texture and detail through all of the mountains here. We've also brought in details into the clouds in the highlights as well. So there's a lot more information for us to work with here. Sure, it looks a little HDR-like at the moment, but we're going to get a much more natural look by the end of this. So currently you can see that I'm just flicking through these different projection models. For panoramas, I often like choosing the cylindrical projection because it just makes things like mountains a little bit taller than the initial spherical selection. However, for this particular one, I quite like the more uniform approach of the fisheye projection. So I'm just going to click continue and then just crop that photo exactly as it is. Now it's very likely that that will not be my final crop, but I like to work on a full-size canvas where I can apply my edit over that whole area, and then I can crop in if I want to at the very end of the process. If I crop down aggressively too early, and then later I decide, oh, you know what, I really wish I had more on the left-hand side of this image. Initially it was there, I've cropped it too early. There's not a lot I can do about it, so leaving your cropping until the end is more of a non-destructive workflow. Let's do a quick comparison between this HDR pano and the original pano that just used a single exposure. You can see between the two, this one certainly has a greater sense of realism, whereas the HDR version, well, it does kind of look a bit HDR-like. However, what I'm going to do is work with this file because I have access to all of this lovely detail, and I already see the first thing I want to deal to, which is actually reduce or minimize some of this detail, particularly in areas I don't really want the viewer to go to. So it's lifted the shadows here and added detail. So let's jump into the edit module and see what we can do about that. I'm going to jump into develop because that's going to give me access to several tools that can help deal to this, such as dropping the exposure. That could be one option. We have the curve that we could drop down, and that can bring down the midtones. We can talk directly into the shadows and drop those as well. And we could play with the highlights if we did want to start to bring those back up. This version of the photo had a lot more local contrast, but it lost that kind of global contrast that our single exposure panorama had. And so I think for the sense of believability, we want to just bring back some of that contrast. As always, I like to do a little before and after when I've made any changes to a tool, just by toggling the quick preview eye icon just here. And then by using masking, we can decide if we want it over the whole photo or just in certain areas. So I'm going to grab my brush and I'm just going to paint this effect in only where I want it. I'm going to work with a nice big brush and a strength around midway, so we'll just set that at 50. And now wherever I paint with this effect, I'm going to get 50% of that look that we just created with the develop tool. So I certainly want to darken down this area here. So I'm going to work into that, work over the mountains, and I'm also going to darken down the water a little bit too, and probably a bit of this bright area of the sky as well. Okay, let's have a little look at our before and our after. Before and after. And because I felt like those shadows had kind of drifted towards more like mid-tones with that HDR conversion, using this develop tool, I was able to correct that. Okay, so I've added one editing tool so far. Have you spotted what I'm doing yet? No? Okay, let's press on and see what else needs doing. So I mentioned before there was too much detail in certain areas, and over here with all of these trees, I just find that that's just a little bit visually chaotic, and I don't really want my viewer's eye drifting to the left or the right of the frame. I want them to be focusing on this central subject here, which is Mitre Peak. This is where I want people to look. And so what I'd like to do is actually reduce some of this crispy detail that we've got going on over here. And so now, after looking at my photo and deciding what it is I actually want to achieve, now I can come over to my tools and have a think, how can I achieve that? Well, we have Structure AI, which if we push it into the positive direction, that's going to obviously add structure, clarity, detail, all that stuff. But if we take it into the negative direction, it softens all of that stuff up. So Structure AI is one option for me. Another one would be to open the details section here, and I can boost up the small details, medium and large details as well. And as you can see, obviously that is adding more detail as well. So just like Structure AI, we don't need to go into the positive territory. What we can do is actually drop these down. And when I do that, that softens everything up really nicely. So here's our before, here's our after. But what we can do is actually still keep detail in it, whilst at the same time we're getting rid of those highlights. And we can do that by dropping down those medium details, because that's where all those little speckles exist. If I push medium details up, I'll bring it down and you look, they get softened off. But what we can do is actually bring the small details up so that we still have information in those trees, and bring the medium and large details down. But whoa, hang on, Anthony. That's affected everything at the moment. And as you know, we don't want to do that. We only want to apply that effect in specific areas. Well, no problem. That's why we have masking. We'll jump into masking here, and I'm going to go to Mask AI. And already I'm thinking, what is the quickest way to isolate it in this area? Well, we've got an option for mountains. So I'm going to click that. And Luminar Neo said, hey, here's all the mountains, which is great. That's a great Kickstarter. Now I can come into my brush and erase it from these areas where I don't want it. So I'll crank my strength all the way to 100 so I can get this done nice and quickly, remove it from those mountains. And now that softening effect is only applied over here on the left. So if I toggle the before and after eyeball tool, you know, it's really subtle, but it's those little details that I like to pay attention to. Now, I'm not convinced that I've taken that detail away as much as I would like. So what I'm going to do is double down on that reducing of details by using Structure AI in a negative amount. So here's our before, here's our after. That's far too much. So we'll just reduce the amount to around -50. And again, we can use masking to just reveal it in that area. And the easiest way to replicate what we just had is to actually copy that mask that we created before. So if I come into the details section here, and we know that we created the mask that we wanted before. So if I show that, we can see that is the mask that we used previously. Look here, we've got the option to copy that mask. And now I can come into my structure, masking, and now I can paste that very same mask. So now you can see that I've softened off this area and nowhere else. And now if we use that as a Kickstarter, we can actually add to that as well. So on the left-hand side, if we just felt like, you know what, there's just a little bit too much detail going on the left-hand side, we can soften that, and the same over here on the right as well. So let's have a quick look where we came from and where we've got to. So here's our before, the original HDR pano, and here is our after. Okay, although we've been using different tools, that is twice now that I've used the same technique. Have you spotted what the technique is yet? So this is it. Literally, I'm looking at my photo and I'm identifying a problem. Step 1. Step 2, find the solution to that problem using whatever tool I choose to solve the problem. Problem, solution. Repeat. Problem, solution. That's it. So by doing that over and over again, your photo edit will organically evolve into something more than what it was originally, even if you didn't straight away know the direction you want to take that edit. So with that philosophy in mind, let's carry on. Let's assess what needs to be done next. Now, I say next, but that's another really important point to bear in mind. We don't need to do this editing in a linear fashion. The great thing about Luminar Neo is we can apply any of these tools in any order, so we don't need to work through A, B, C, D, etc. We can jump around D, A, F. We can go in any direction we want. As soon as we've seen a problem, just select the tool, get it sorted, and then see what's next. Okay, so what's the next problem that I can see? Well, unlike the issue we had here where we had too much detail on the left-hand side, in these mountains where I do want people to look, I feel like we could actually add a little bit more interest and detail through there. And so now I've identified my problem, I need the solution. And for me, I'm thinking probably the easiest solution for this would be structure AI. And this time we're going to use it in a positive sense. So I'll push it all the way to 100 so I can see exactly what's going on and decide, do I like this as a solution to that problem? Well, certainly not 100%, but I don't mind what it's doing. It's not amazing. I think part of the problem that we've got at the moment is the fact that there's no real directional light. Everything looks very, very flat indeed. So I will also need to solve that problem as well. But for now, I'm just going to put in a little bit of structure AI into these mountains. So again, I'm going to come into mask AI. I'm going to choose the mountains. And now I can erase from the areas I don't want it. So I'm just going to come to my brush, erase, push it to 100 to get it done nice and quickly. And there we go. We should have structure AI only applied to those mountains. So let's see, before and after. Yep, just a nice little subtle pop on those in the background. The next problem that I see is an issue of balance and maybe a little bit of visual boredom, because we are currently flipping this image around 2 axes. So we have symmetry across the horizontal and the vertical. So top and bottom of the frame are pretty much identical because of that reflection, and left and right are also pretty much identical. If you look at the land masses that are featured, you have 2 larger land masses on the left and right, and then you have 2 mountainous regions in the background there. And so things are looking pretty uniform and could certainly be a lot more visually interesting. So what I would like to do to try and solve this, because I can't actually manipulate the shapes of these mountains, etc., what I can do is change the brightness values in the sky. We could leave the left-hand side brighter than the right-hand side. So let's actually see if that makes a bit of a difference. So I want to bring down the brightness level only in the bright parts of the clouds over here. So what is my solution to that problem? Well, I know that curves is really good for specifying which luminance values you want to darken. So this point on the right-hand side, that controls our brightest values. So we can brighten the highlights, we can darken them down. The point on the bottom left, that is talking into the shadows. So I'm going to bring the highlights down, but as you can see, that's making the whole photo a lot darker. So we can put a point on the midtones and just bring that back to approximately where it was. And now you can see that it's just made those highlights darker, but we're not really getting the effect that I want. So I'm just going to play with this until we keep a little bit of detail in those clouds. And I think we'll also introduce a little bit of blue over in that side of the clouds as well, just so we're going to get a difference between a warmer color on the left and a cooler color on the right. Okay, so now we just need to mask that in only where we want it. And this time I'm going to leverage the Sky AI just as a Kickstarter. And if I toggle the before and after, you can see how we're affecting the sky now. And now I'm just going to use the brush to refine what I've done there. So let's keep a nice big brush with a soft edge, but we're going to reduce the strength down. So I'm currently adding this effect in, and I am just going to let it wash over that mountain there just to avoid any haloing. And then we can also use the erase version just to sort of bring that back And we certainly want to erase it completely from the left-hand side of the sky. So I'm just going to start doing a few passes with that strength on 44 and just make sure that we have a nice transition across the sky. So here's our before, here's our after. And I'll just make sure I'm happy with my adjustments. I might even drop the exposure just ever so slightly as well. And now, even though I'm going to carry on working with the same tool, I can repeat that thought process of problem, solution. Problem being that the reflection would also need to be darker. Solution, just paint it in at the bottom half of the water as well. So I can jump back to masking, grab my paint tool. Let's push this strength to about halfway. And I'll just start painting over the water here. And switch over to the erase because I want to keep it a little bit brighter towards the center of the frame as well. So here's our before, here's our after, before and after. Okay, just while I'm on that tool, another problem and solution is I'm finding that this area here that's in shadow, it's just a little bit too bright and also a little bit warm compared to the rest of the photo. We've got kind of orangey browns going on in the water, whereas everything else is taking on rather a bluey grey hue at the moment. So I may just use this tool in the paint mode and just put a little bit of that blue darkening effect over that area as well. Let's have a little toggle of before and after. Yeah, I think that looks a bit better. Okay, the next problem that I feel we need to solve is there's just no direction of light in this photo. Like, sure, we can tell that the light is coming from the left-hand side, but it's so diffused over the whole area that it's really lacking any interest. And so I'm hoping that we can actually paint in a little bit of contrast and light into this photo. So let's give that a go. There's many different ways that we could do this, but I am actually just going to jump into the develop section again. Let's boost up the exposure for a start. Of course, I'm going to paint this in selectively only in the areas that I want brightened, but we're going to boost the exposure and let's have a little play with curves. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast with an S curve because I don't want those brighter areas to lose contrast and just get bleached out. That's why I'm adding this S in. Everything's looking very blue at the moment, so if we're adding some light onto the sides of these mountains, I would actually like that to be a little bit warmer. So I'm going to open up the color section within the same tool and just bring up the temperature slightly. And I'm also going to bring down the vibrance just a little bit, so we're reducing some of that blue intensity. So I'll toggle our before and our after. That certainly is quite a change. It's probably quite aggressive, more than what I'm hoping for. But this time, by using my brush with a very low strength, it's just going to kind of feather this in, just tickle this effect in. So I certainly want to make sure that we're having some of this light applied to the left-hand side of this mountain here. I don't really want to lighten up the sky too much. So probably the best way to tackle this is to jump into Mask AI. Again, select my mountains. And then just like a sculptor, chip away at this effect. So now with the erase tool, I can just come in and paint this effect away. We can use our left mouse bracket key just to reduce the size of the brush. And I'm just crafting an edge to differentiate between the highlight and the shadow side on this mountain. So if we can see our before and after, you can see that we're just starting to craft in some light in there. And to judge what else needs improving, it's always a good idea to flip between where you came from and where you're currently at, before and after. And the current tool that we just applied, if I look at the before and after, while I kind of like it, I feel like, again, it might just be a little bit over the top. So you can always come in and just dial back some of those effects. That's just a little bit more believable. We'll go with that. So by darkening the sky on the right-hand side, we have helped to make the light just a little bit more dynamic. The photo's starting to look more interesting. So that's the problem of the left-hand side versus the right-hand side symmetry issue kind of taken care of. But what about the top and the bottom? We still have pretty much a mirror image top to bottom. So that's the problem as I see it. I don't want my viewer to be bored by the fact that the top looks so similar to the bottom. What's a solution? Well, we have the Relight AI tool, and that allows us to control the brightness in the near and the far, but also the color in the background as well. So by controlling the brightness near and far, we can change the look of this photo. So in effect, we could darken down the foreground and then brighten up the background. That's one thing that we could do, and we can then play with the depth slider as well. And we can further differentiate the two halves by cooling down the foreground and then warming up the background. So that is another option as well. So here's our before, here's our after. That is a huge change with that tool. Now, I'm not suggesting that we go that heavy-handed. I just wanted to show you what that can do. So I'm just actually going to reduce these effects slightly to a point that I'm happy with them. Okay, we'll go with something like that. Again, let's check our before and our after. Okay, I feel like we're heading in the right direction. What's our next problem to solve? Well, for me personally, for my landscape photos, I don't like to have a lot of visual clutter. I like to keep things nice and clean. As you can see in the water, there's a lot of sticks, maybe some stones poking out of the water, just breaking the surface, and it's just creating a little bit of visual chaos. Now, I don't mind some of those elements, but particularly towards the edge of the frame, I don't want those distractions because it kind of brings your eye to the edge of the frame, and that's not a good thing. So I'm going to use the clone tool to solve that problem. So we'll jump back to the tools and scroll down, and all the way at the bottom here, we have the clone tool. It's very easy to use. I like to use it at 100%. We click to where we're going to borrow pixels from, and then we paint over the item we want to remove. It's always good to sample close to the area that you're replacing so that the pattern, color, and brightness level all match. So as I work my way around, I'm holding Alt to sample from a new area, and as soon as I've held Alt and clicked on that area, I can then paint with those pixels over the new area. And if you make a mistake, you can press Ctrl Z to undo it. And as you work on smaller areas, don't forget to reduce the size of your brush so you're just covering over the area that you want to replace. Okay, and just to double check we're happy with our clone, we can look at the before and after. Before and after, if you look at all that higgledy-piggledy mess, and boom, it's gone. Here it is, and it's gone. Okay, so now you're getting the hang of this approach. What is our next problem? Well, for me, I'm not really enjoying the fact that this is missing some sort of drama in the photo. Yes, it's an amazing bit of scenery, but there's something missing. So what can we do about that? Well, I know for a fact that adding some godlike sun rays into this photo could look really cool. It may fail miserably, but it might be worth a shot, right? So I'm going to have a play around with that. So that's my first kind of more creative decision that I've made. I want to add some sun rays, but that's introduced another problem that I need to solve. We don't see sun rays bursting through the air if there's no atmosphere to catch those beams of light. So there's no atmosphere in here. So let's add some atmosphere AI. So let's open up Atmosphere AI, and I'm just going to put the amount all the way to 100 so we can see exactly what's going on. So that's fog. That has a very top-heavy split on that. I don't really like it. Layered fog, well, I'm not really seeing what's going on here. So just like we crank the amount slider up, I also like to put the depth slider all the way to 100 as well, just temporarily, just while I'm going through these options so I can get a feel for them. Now, haze, this is starting to kind of do what I'm hoping for. Before and after, a little bit heavy-handed, but rather than work with the amount slider to reduce it, what I prefer to do is leave it at its full intensity and then grab a mask, and I can just add it only where I want it. So I'm just start painting this in. We'll go for a nice big brush again, put my strength at 50%, and I'm just going to make one pass just along the horizon. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's have it encroach just a little closer towards the camera and do another pass that way. Before and after, before and after. As I said before, I don't want to bring attention to the sides of the frames, and as they get brighter, that's exactly what's going to happen. Eye always goes to brighter elements in the photo, so I'm just going to get my erase tool and drop those back. Before and after, before and after. Yep, not too bad. Now the next problem that I see here is that the atmosphere doesn't seem to build through the scene. As the distance between the camera and an object increases, there's more air present in between, and therefore that air has the potential to hold more moisture particles that make up fog, mist, whatever you want to call it, and therefore the fog effect should be greater when the distance to our subject is greater. So that's why I'm adding another instance of the Atmosphere AI tool, and I'm painting it in with a greater strength on the elements that are further away in the scene. And that's also helping with our perception of depth in this scene as well. So now we've got our atmosphere, let's come in and we can add some sun rays. One of my favorite tools inside Luminar. It's been here for forever, but it's still such a great one. Look, if I take this sun behind this mountain here, you can see that it gets blocked Not completely, we can deal to those extra rays though, but look, it enables us to add just a really interesting effect. I'm going to finesse this, but you can see where we're going with this. Look, before and after, before and after. I like to work with my amount very strong so that I can see exactly what I'm doing. So the overall look, if I take that down, it darkens everything. If I bring it up, it means that the shadows aren't really affected by the sun effect. But I like to just darken those shadows a little bit so we get a little bit more contrast going on. Not too much, something like that. That's pretty good. Our sun ray length allows us to determine how far into the scene we want those rays going. And the penetration slider, this is the one that determines whether or not those rays actually break through dark elements. And we want the dark element of that mountain to just occlude or block out that light. The number of sun rays allows us to have more of a beam-like quality to the light passing through, or just more of a kind of wash coming through. And I often like to combine both of those effects for a more realistic look. The sun warmth isn't going to do too much for us because the sun itself is actually hidden. The rays warmth, however, if we push that up, you can see that we can actually colorize those rays. And I like to just have a little bit of warmth so that we're not completely neutralizing that light. I like a little bit of warmth, but I don't want to go too far that it's oversaturated. Something like that's pretty good. And then we can use the randomize slider just to play with different effects, different looks based on the settings that we've predetermined. I'm going to go with something like that, and now I'll just reduce the amount. So this is my sort of before when I'm sat at 0, and just start to intensify that look. Yep, we'll go with that. And now I'll just use a bit of masking to erase it from the top of the frame, because I don't want our viewer's eye just to fall out of the top of the frame there. So I'm just going to reduce that along the very top edge of the photo. Let's look at our before and our after. Before and after. It's probably just a little bit too intense, so again, we can just reduce that effect before and after. Okay, I'd like to add another sun ray effect similar to the last one, but this time make the beams more apparent. So again, I'm going to crank the amount up just so I can see what's going on. I want to position the sun in pretty much the same place that I had the last one, and perhaps this time I don't want the light rays going as far, but we'll push the number of sun rays all the way to 100. Now we don't really see much difference going on there to what we had before, but as I start to play with this randomize slider, we can see the different effects coming through. And using those two beams just coming onto the peak there, that might be quite nice. So let's just mask that in, and this time I'm just going to paint the effect only over these beams. I'll start building it up with a lower strength, something like 28. And if I'm happy with my mask, I can just jump back to my adjustments and now just reduce the amount so it's a little bit more subtle. Look, we'll go with that. Problems and solutions. I would love to know in the comments what you guys think to this approach and if it is helpful for you. It's helpful for me because as I've added this solution, the sun rays, to add a bit more drama, it's actually introduced another problem that now needs to be solved. And the problem is this: by lightening the area of the sky and the mountain there, we're just starting to wash out a little bit and lose a bit of contrast. So I need to fix that, and that's what I'll do now. So my go-to for fixing issues of contrast would be the curves tool. However, we do have access in Luminar Neo to the smart contrast, which is a really nice tool as well. So if I flick out before and after and just look at the mountain, I'm just training my eye not to look at the photo as a whole, but only the area I'm interested in fixing. And to be honest, that's not really doing what I'm after. So let me come into the curves themselves and just see if I can't fine tune that. As you guys know, if we bring a point down in the shadows and lift a point up in the highlights, you're going to add contrast into your photo. And then by tweaking those points positionally, moving them up and down, you can just fine tune that contrast and get it looking how you want. Now, if I toggle my before and after, I can see that I've definitely added contrast through these mountains. And now I can just come in with a mask. And as soon as I start painting that in, we're going to go back to our original look and we can just see that I can start to build this effect up. So anywhere you see that kind of pink masking going on, that is indicating that I'm going to be adding in that contrast effect from the curves that I just created. You can probably tell what the issue is with working this way. It's quite easy to get lost in the weeds. And that is why I still do recommend, if you can have a vision for where you want to take your photo, that is a much better approach. But like me in this instance where I'm not really sure where I'm going with it, that ability to just keep chipping away at problem Solution, problem, solution. It is going to give you a roadmap, a path forward for your edit. So this is the first time I've ever shared this approach, and I would love to know what you think in the comments below. I've got a couple more things I want to deal to in this photo, and that is one drawback of it is that you can always find more problems and little issues, so you can get lost in the weeds and edits can run away on you in terms of time. So just be mindful of that, and with that in mind, I'm just going to do these two things. One being I want to add a vignette to draw attention to the center of the frame, but I'm not going to do it in the traditional way that you might think of with a vignette. And then I'm just going to put on our creative sprinkling at the end just to bring it all together. Okay, let's do that. So normally for a vignette, you would just jump into the vignette tool and start bringing this down. And there you go, you've got your vignette. However, I don't really like using the vignette tool. It's very cool because you can actually pick a subject point, which is great. However, we don't have access to a mask. And the problem that I'm not able to solve with this tool is as I add that vignette, it's darkening down the top left corner where the sunlight is. And I don't want that to happen. And so vignette, I'm sorry, my friend, I'm not going to use you. Bye-bye. We're going to jump into the develop tool here, and that gives us a few more options, which is really nice. We could potentially drop the exposure down. That's one way to darken around the edges, or we can be even more precise and control that look with the curves. Just drop down the highlights, maybe bring the midtones back up a little bit. And if we didn't want to crush the black pixels down completely, we can lift that point up. So you really can get very precise with this method of adding a vignette. But yeah, of course, at the moment we don't have a vignette, we just have a darker photo. But the great thing is that's going to allow us to add a mask. And just like with the traditional vignette, we have the ability to work with an ellipse. Currently that's a circle, but we have these points at the edge that we can pull in to create more of an elliptical look. Currently, if I apply this effect, it's going to darken the center of the frame, which isn't what we want. However, with the masking, we can actually invert the mask, or we could if it was still active. I've deactivated the mask, so I can't actually do anything with it right now. So I'm going to jump into the edits section. That's going to allow me to come back into masking. And now I have mask actions where I can just invert that action. So there you go. That is how we can control that effect before and after, before and after. And the problem we had was we didn't want to darken down that top left corner. We didn't have a mask with vignette. We do with this. So now I'm actually able to come in and erase from here. I'm going to work with quite a strong amount just to take it away there. And look at that. We've brought that area back to full brightness. So we effectively have a vignette around most of the frame, but not all of it. I might just take away a little bit of it around this central area as well. There we go. Nice bit of fine tuning on our vignette. And next problem is it just doesn't have any creative zhuzh. So let's just throw a few tools at just finishing this off. Let's grab the smart contrast and just have a little play with that. See what that's doing for us. Yep, I do definitely want to just add a bit more contrast in, even play with my curve as well. We can even do a bit of color grading with our curve as well. If we bring this point down that represents the brightest blues, if we bring that down, it's taking blue away from those highlights and therefore introducing yellow. So what we can do is do a very subtle push in the negative direction, and that's going to add yellow into those highlights. We can balance that out by lifting the blues in the shadows, and that's just going to add a little bit of blue into those shadows. So we have a nice complementary scheme going on there. It does still feel very cool, so I'm going to see if just by boosting up the temperature a little bit, it might just warm things up, look a little bit more inviting. At no point did we add any sharpness to our photo, and so it might be worth just putting a little bit of sharpening on now as well. Another problem solved. And now as a final touch, just with most of my work, I love to put on a little bit of the mystical filter. Not too much in this case. I think it's going to be too heavy-handed, especially at 100%, but we could leave it at 100, just have a little play around and make sure that we're happy with the overall effect. I don't want to darken the shadows too much because I've already done that by playing with the contrast, and then we can play with the smoothness to see how detailed we want this effect. I don't want it too washed out, so I want to keep the smoothness relatively low, and we could cool things down or even introduce just more of a golden color if we really wanted to go that way. But once we've got those settings, roughly how we want it to look, that's when we come back and say, hey, I don't want anywhere near that amount. I just want to tickle a little bit of this in. So there we get our before and our after, just a little final pop and glow. And now it's time for my absolute favorite part, where we look at our before and I release to see our after. Before and after. You can see that that is an absolutely huge change between our original HDR panoramic merge and that edited version. And let's just have a look at the edits that went to make that up. Now, as I look at that huge list of tools that have gone into this edit, it makes me realize another reason that I really love using this approach. And that is that the result I get is always going to be different on any given day, because you're going to see your photo in a different way each time you look at it. You're going to see different problems, and any problem that you go to solve, as you saw, there are many different ways that you can reach a solution to that issue. And so the tool that you choose on one day will be different to a tool that you go to on another day. Every single time you edit, your work is going to be unique. Like I say, guys, let me know in the comments what you think of this approach. Let me know if it's been useful to you and if you'll be using it going forward. Do me a favor, leave me a thumbs up on the video. And for sure, share this with other people you think may benefit as well. Sharing is caring. It's my new phrase. Also, I'm back with a longer format video. Did you enjoy that? Did you stick around? If you're watching me now, you did. So thank you very much for that. I know a lot of people just flick through stuff. So you're one of the good ones. I thank you very much. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye for now.